Thanks for attending today's webinar on biodigestion for pet food. Presenters are Aimee, Christy from the Pacific Shellfish Institute, and myself with EPWN. I'm going to start out talking about how biodigestion is different from composting. This is going to be very simple because I'm a layman and it might even sound like Sesame Street a little bit, but there are two terms that are used interchangeably. For instance, these two fellows in videos telling us how to compost dog waste. Do you hear a reverb?
I do.
Yeah, everybody needs to mute themselves.
Okay, great, thank you. You take a garbage can, you cut the bottom out, you drill holes in it, bury it in the ground, surround it with some gravel, and you put your dog waste in it. You put some septic starter on top that you get from the hardware store, and this is being used all over the world, I'm sure, because there are many, many videos. Now, this works very well if you don't put it next to a foundation or next to a wall or anywhere near waterways, because it will drain into the water. Also, you need soil that has a lot of drainage. You don't want to put it someplace where there's clay. So that in itself is a very simple idea of how you do biodigestion for dog waste. You don't want to do it for cats. They have pathogens that are different for dogs. So this whole presentation on biodigestion actually refers to dogs. The process is different. One is aerobic and the other is anaerobic. We're not talking about pet poo, we're just talking about the processes. Composting needs a lot of air and a balance of moisture and dryness. Anaerobic needs dampness, darkness. They both need high to moderate temperatures. When it gets very cold, they usually shut down. But they're done with very, very different microbes. You can see they're different. They don't really look like this. But the ones that are thermophilic for composting, I'm going to just kind of call these the sunshine boys because it's easier than saying thermophilic each time. These are the mesophilics. I'll call them the vampires because they like it dark and damp. But they're two separate, entirely different microbes. One likes the heat and the warmth and the air, and the other one likes the darkness and dampness. The composting results in finished compost, which you could put on your soil after aging a little bit, and it's good for your soil. When you do anaerobic digestion, you get slurry or sludge or digestate, and it can be used to enrich soil once it's processed a bit. The composting reduces methane emission. There's some carbon dioxide output, but what you're doing is reducing methane with this process. With anaerobic, you're producing methane and other gases, and this can be captured and used for energy. Now, aerobic or composting pretty much kills pathogens, pretty much. If you're going to use it commercially, test it. If you're going to use it on your gardens or your plants at home, you can just use the finished compost. With anaerobic, does it kill pathogens? Probably not. So they've got to be tested, it's got to be processed. And the aerobic process, composting, when it's done well, it smells so good. In fact, there's a living creature that resides in your backyard compost pile, and it can do mind-altering work. When it enters your body, it functions like an antidepressant pill, and it boosts your mood. So composting can make you feel good. But digestion smells bad. It has an obnoxious odor, and you know when it's happening. Now, these two sets of microbes, the sunshine boys and the vampires, are really interchangeable. A badly managed compost pile becomes septic because there's too much water, not enough air, bad recipe. We're getting reverb, I think, from Miranda. So if you could turn off, mute your, mute your microphone, Miranda. Okay. Anaerobic digestate can be recharged. You can turn it back into compost. You add brown material, you turn it more often, it gets dry, and all those little vampires kind of go away because they're not very happy there, and all the sunshine boys come back. So you've got your anaerobics back and your composting starts. So they're kind of interchangeable. The big anaerobic digestion facilities sometimes digest the material first, and then they compost it. They use the digestate or the goop as a compost starter. They put it on top of other material, and the composting decreases the pathogens that might be in the digestate. So that's kind of a quick look at digestion versus composting. And Aimee's going to talk about a study that she did on dog waste options for Pacific Shellfish Institute.
Great. Thank you, Rose. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I work at Pacific Shellfish Institute. It's a nonprofit that's down in Washington. I've been a shellfish biologist there for over 20 years now. And when I first moved here 20 years ago, we were having some shellfish bed downgrades, which resulted in some shellfish protection districts, which freed up a little bit of local money to do a lot of outreach and education surrounding things like pet waste issues. So that's how we kind of got our start. We did some research looking at like mycorrhiza and how that could possibly treat water in some of these ditches, and just a lot of outreach education. And when we were communicating with a lot of people, it seems like over time we've seen a switch. Like if you look back at a lot of the pet waste brochures, you'll see that there were a lot of options for dealing with pet waste. You could, they were like, oh, you can throw it in the garbage, or you can flush it down the toilet, or you can bury it in your backyard. There were all these options listed on brochures. And I think if you look now, you'll see that the whole state has sort of come together in this mantra of scoop it, bag it, trash it. Puget Sound Starts Here promotes that heavily. And when you talk to people, they're happy to do it because it's very effective of keeping like the dog waste out of the water and protecting human health. But folks are expressing that they would like to see more options. Next slide, Rose. Thank you for advancing the slides. Okay, so our executive director at the time, she sent me this email showing me the Park Spark project. And I had this real juvenile response. I was like, oh my God, I love this so much I could marry it. And I feel like I kind of did. I went into this deep dive after that, really looking into like, could we do this project here at our off-leash dog park, and what other things are going on in the world surrounding this issue? So again, you drop your poop in this digester and you can power a lamp. I just thought, oh my gosh, we have to do a barista station and have like, black gold coffee or something like that. I would still love to do that, but okay, next slide. So this process, anaerobic digestion is Earth's oldest recycling process, so it should be very straightforward, right? It uses archaea, which until I learned about anaerobic digestion, didn't even know it was different from bacteria. There's the plants, animals, the fungus, those weird protists, and bacteria. So archaea, this process is pretty straightforward. If you were to take your dog poop, put it in a container with absolutely no oxygen, the archaea will start pumping out biogas, and you will have a fertilizer as the digestate, which reduces odor, and there's some level of treatment there. And these small anaerobic digesters are all over the world. Biotech has created a lot of these in India. They're a nonprofit organization with the goal of helping people treat their wastewater and acquire energy independence, which is fabulous. Okay, next slide, Rose. So the Park Spark, this kind of showed everybody that this process could be done. It was more of an art installation. It's considered an art installation. And you can see Matthew Mazzota there. He's like putting this dog waste that's in a digestible bag into the Park Spark, into this digestion unit, which you turn a handle, it mixes it up, it creates methane gas, and then the light comes up in that lamp post. And there's a really great YouTube video just showing his excitement the first time that lamp lit up. But this is where the media story stops. The story kind of continues because, of course, this unit didn't work when winter rolled around and the microbes got cold because they like it nice and cold. There was also this digestate was just, pumped out and taken to a wastewater treatment facility. And then it's kind of like doing the dishes after a party, right? Then there's the messy job of like, you got to clean out the tanks and get all the rocks out and everything else. So anyways, but it was quick and dirty and it was successful while it lasted, and it really sparked the imagination and the enthusiasm around the world to do similar projects. Okay, Rose, next one. So Rose connected me with Nick Chambers, and he runs Living Arts Systems in Colorado, and he had designed this unit that I had my eye on, because I am not going to go welding some anaerobic digestion tank. I don't know how to do that. You could purchase this for, I think it was like $15,000. It holds 1,200 gallons is the capacity, and you could probably put 20 pounds of dog waste in it per day. But I really liked it because it had this exterior where you could put a lot of educational materials and information on it. It had a really simple drain where you could drain the digestate out, and like he said, just, you know, pipe it into a compost pile. Inside, you can see that hopper where you would place the dog waste. And I guess we had discussions, I recall, this was 10 years ago, that of like, you have to macerate it and chop it all up. So it's more like a dog poo milkshake before it goes into this digester. And that group right there, we were taking this course. This was located at Santa Fe's Community College Biofuel Center of Excellence. Santa Fe was probably the coldest place I've ever been to in my life. I've never experienced like the ice freezing in your nose when you're outside. That said, we were able to cook our lunch on that digester from that barbecue there with the help of the solar panel that kept the microbes nice and like warm enough. That group, if I could take that group with me back here to Olympia to do this project, we would have success. I think this group could probably solve any of our world's problems. Such a clever bunch, but that was not the case. But anyways, it was very fun to go get that training. And it seems somewhat promising. So this is right. Oh, that's fine. You can go to the next slide. Okay. This was straight out of a manual that we had at the course. You don't have to read it. I don't know if there's any master gardeners out there, master compost recyclers. I am, and I don't want to belittle, like, I don't want to make it sound like composting is easy, but you know, it's like 3 parts carbon, 1, oh, now I can't remember. 3 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen, add some water, some air, and you're good to go. I know it's an art. I know it's more complicated than that, but I think with composting, you can see what you're doing. You can see it, you can turn it, you can feel it, you can squeeze it. And I think with anaerobic digestion, there's a lot of moving parts. And the only way you know if things are going right is by looking at the pH or looking at the gas that's being generated. But the big key things is you want no oxygen in your system. You want to keep the pH around neutral, a little up and down, and you want to keep it warm. But you also have all these other things to consider, like the feedstock that's going in and getting it all macerated. And if you're going to mix your system, how you take out those solids, if you're going to use the liquid, the digestate as like a liquid fertilizer, or if you're going to take the water out of it, you got to clean up the gas. So there's a lot to consider. Next slide. And once you get into the system, you know, for like an ancient process that should just kind of go on its own, it's rather complicated. There's these 4 steps to anaerobic digestion. Each step kind of breaks down your dog poop into smaller and smaller, simpler molecules. But the thing to know is that you have these bacteria in there, we'll just call them the acid producing bacteria, that break stuff down into things like carbon dioxide and hydrogen and acetic acid, which is very acidic. So you will see the pH drop like a rock in your tank. And then the methane producers, those archaea, come in and they turn those products into the methane gas and the carbon dioxide. And when that gas comes off, the pH then goes back up and you should stabilize around 7. The problem is if you have any of those different communities, if they go haywire, your pH is going to fluctuate greatly and it's going to really piss off those other microbial communities and they're not going to be happy. So what I learned, like the overall thing that I learned from this process is it's a little bit finicky, and it's, you want to go slow, no rapid movements. And if you get this tank working properly, you want to kind of maintain your course. You don't really want to rock the boat. You want to keep that pH as stable as possible. So later, you know, when you talk about, can you just take your dog poop and throw it into one of those large scale anaerobic digesters, those like $1 million projects, throwing in poop waste is kind of rocking the boat. Like it can be done, but you could face a little bit of resistance. So there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong. I remember at the bottom of one of Nick's emails, he said, how do you avoid potential issues with 1,000 gallons of dog poo? I think that's when things started feeling a little tight around the collar for me. But okay, next slide. All right, so some of the projects that were going on at the time, this was Cosmo Dog Park. It was out in Gilbert, Arizona. And their problem was not that it would get cold, it was actually that it would get too hot, like 110 degrees hot. So Michael Ingram, who's a graduate student, they created this digester at a park, and the tanks were below ground to sort of mitigate for those fluctuating temperature changes. And he was very, great, free with his information, but a little hesitant too. There was a lot of media surrounding this project when it came out. When I talked to him, it wasn't working. So they thought that maybe they had some oxygen that was getting into the tanks. It just wasn't producing the methane gas, but their engineers, they were like tweaking with it. I came across an article by The Economist a few years after it, and they basically called the article Anaerobic Digestion of Pet Waste a crapshoot, and they called this a failure, which I thought was a little harsh. But they also talked about a new project, Sparky Power. 3 of these anaerobic digesters were going into parks around New York. So if anybody in the audience today knows about Sparky Power, I couldn't find anything about it, but put something in the chat there. Okay, next slide. Another enthusiastic person that I talked to was Gary Downey. He's in the UK. He came out with these, I must say, these wonderful little dicky bags for putting your dog poop in when you're walking around that I still have. He wanted to make an anaerobic digester in the shape of a fire-breathing dragon, which I really would have loved to have seen, but he never did. He was working with some engineers that came up with these other designs, these street clean micros, which are anaerobic digestion systems that could treat more like food waste and bio waste, but could be used for pet waste. The problem is these units are $200,000 to $450,000. So, and I think this is what you come up against with a lot of anaerobic digesters, is they're expensive. I guess the in-vessel composting systems aren't cheap either, but pretty expensive. I have emailed all these people to find out what they're doing today, and it's just been crickets. So I think that he is now doing like DNA tracking and testing of dogs in neighborhoods, but no longer anaerobic digestion. Next slide. Okay, so Duncan was probably the most enthusiastic person I talked to. He was also working on anaerobic digestion of dog waste out in Australia, and there were some great articles that came out. The thing that was different about his project was he was going to actually be the first one to focus on this digestate and how to use it and how treated it actually is when it comes out of these digesters, and whether or not you can get those microbe levels down through composting or fresh out of the digester. So he did come up with a great classroom curriculum, which you can still find online, but when you go to their main link, you don't find anything. So again, maybe Ruth or the folks in Australia, if you know anything about Duncan Chu, no, I'm seeing shaking heads. I was gonna say, put it in the chat, because his word of advice was, if you go into this endeavor, that you need to be very resilient because you're gonna come into one hurdle after another. And so you need a really enthusiastic team around you. So I really enjoyed talking with him. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of summarize, at the end of the report, I kind of found that 10 years ago, at least, these small scale anaerobic digesters were kind of in their infancy as far as treating dog waste. You could use them maybe as a demonstration. They weren't kicking out a lot of energy. You still had to treat the digestate somehow. Nobody had been working on whether or not you could effectively turn it into compost. And there weren't a lot of successful projects at the time. So I did come up with there was an article that was put out in 2007 that I have here. It was the Seattle Solid Waste Recycling, Waste Reduction and Facilities Opportunities Report. And they were also doing kind of a feasibility study looking at all these different considerations, anaerobic digestion, composting. And they had some conclusions that I guess were sort of similar to mine. And their conclusions actually came out of San Francisco's conclusions. They said that pet waste, these small anaerobic digestion systems, they did not recommend them. The current technologies were impractical for households. And these were their reasons. They said that there was not enough waste generated for efficient production at home. It's a complex process which requires maintenance. And this last one that we haven't really talked about is it produces an odorless, explosive, and toxic gas, which is stored on site, which was an unacceptable safety hazard. So at least 10 years ago when I looked at this, I guess the idea of doing an anaerobic digester at the Hawks Prairie off-leash park was looking a little less attractive. And I was looking into other options like the ones before you here, where we were already seeing huge success thanks to Rose and EnviroWag with some of this large scale composting, where you bring all of your waste into this in-vessel tumbler system and you produce this really high quality compost. This also motivated Green Pet down here in Gig Harbor in Washington, who is collecting poop from Portland and Seattle and putting it in a tumbler system, and also creating this great compost, which has since been purchased by Mud Bay, which is fabulous. And so I'm really excited to see where these take off. But if I have to add my own little opinion piece here, I would say that if we want real meaningful change with how we treat our pet waste, it's going to have to involve using some of our existing infrastructures and probably tossing things in the green bin and taking it to large scale composting or large scale anaerobic digestion places. But in the meantime, until that happens, hopefully that will happen someday, but in the meantime, and for those that are off grid, I really would like to see some other exciting, innovative ideas. And I think, Rose, I'm going to pass it off to you because you've come up with a bunch of these new, exciting, innovative ideas.
Yeah, and this first picture is something that you can never unsee again. This is a bus in the United Kingdom, and it's got an image wrap of 5 people on a toilet. And this bus traveled over 300 kilometers, 186 miles. They have a full tank of gas on the roof from a sewage system. And the 5 people are showing the amount of fuel that can be produced by the annual food and sewage waste of 5 passengers. So just 5 people can, you know, keep that thing moving. 5 people a year can keep that thing moving. And below it is a double-decker bus, also in the United Kingdom, runs on the same principle. I'm not sure where they keep the gas, but the emissions are going to really be good for air quality because the emissions aren't nearly as dangerous as fossil fuel emissions. And biogas energy is considered carbon neutral because the carbon emitted when burning it comes from carbon fixed by plants, not by fossil fuel, you know, which, you know, you can't renew. Now here's Brian Harper in Malvern Hills, also in the UK. They seem to be doing a whole lot there about this. And he came up with the system, and he actually has it working in his neighborhood where you can light a light. This is very similar to Park Spark that Aimee talked about. Only he has it kind of down to a really cool system where you put a paper bag with dog poo in, and you turn a little lever, and it actually lights a light. So he's come that far just in so many years, what, 10 years, 8 years. And he's actually trying to sell this for 5,000 pounds each. He's not getting a whole lot of results, I don't think, from communities. But this is an example of someone trying to do a for-profit with a system for transforming dog waste. Now, these are ones that you've seen, doggy dooley. These are all for individual households. They're the same as a garbage can with a hole in that Mike Levinson down here in the corner is doing. Now, Mike started this maybe 15 years ago, and he did a video, it went viral. And from there, that spawned dozens and dozens of videos about the whole idea of doing this. And you can find it on YouTube. I think it's still the best video. But all these little in-ground dog waste digesters, biodigesters came along. The doggy dooley, we know, it's the same as the garbage can in that you shouldn't be using it near a water source. It should be where the ground will drain the water that comes out of this. It's going to fill up, and eventually you have to take the digestate out. But the nice thing about the garbage can is when it starts to fill up, you can lift the whole garbage can out and just bury the stuff. Put the garbage can somewhere else and plant some flowers over them. But again, you can't have it near water. You shouldn't have it near your foundation or near a wall, and you need good drainage. Now, EnsoPet is something that Ruth has tried in Australia, right, Ruth? Didn't you have a problem with capacity for that?
Yeah, they're actually fairly small, and because we've got 2 medium-sized dogs, I think within 2 weeks we filled it up, and we started it in winter here, which not as cold as where some of you guys live, but it just wasn't breaking down fast enough. So for us, I would probably need quite a few of these vessels to actually just cater for 2 dogs at home.
Another Australian option is called the Pet Wizard. and it's by Biomaster. They market it with worms coming up from the bottom and microbes at the top. And I have no idea how well this works, but it sells, and you can buy all these, or you can just do the garbage can with Mike, and it's free. So now we're getting into the progress that's been made in biodigesters. Actually, these systems don't drain into the ground. They're above the ground. And think of them like a cow or a dog or a person. Food goes in at one end, it biodigests, and out of the other end comes a liquid, which can be used as fertilizer. And at the bottom, which can be drained as a slurry or bigestate. And here's the same fellow that was in Aimee's slide, because Envirotech Biogas Systems is a family system in India. And it's really remarkable looking at the 3 different countries where these originate: India, Israel, and China. They're the kind of the big 3 with these above ground biodigesters. In India, the whole thrust is teaching community, students, and it's called a social enterprise organization. They sell all sorts of things to make money. And their big plan is to keep food waste out of landfills because there's not enough landfill space in India. So they're no longer just trying to cook food with all these systems. Now they're trying to use this to cook food also, but they're making small models that can be used in the city, and they can be placed on patios or on balconies. And all the information is right here about it. They have videos, and people use these, by the hundreds in India. So whenever the biogas starts to build up, the top goes up, and it probably goes all the way up to the top. So you know how much biogas you have to work with. And another interesting system, if you want more about this, you can go to any of these companies. They will talk to you. Another interesting system, which is large, is Systema Bio. And this is done in India, Colombia, Kenya. It started in Mexico with a grant. And this company now has these systems all over the world. It's incredible what they've done in just 5 or 6 years. There's one at the top that's done for a ranch, and there's a lot of manure in here. Systema will install it, and they'll maintain it. If something goes wrong, you give them a call, and they come running, and they'll fix it. This is a big system for ranches. This is a smaller system for a community. And this is what they do with the effluent, which is the liquid. They will put it on crops to fertilize it. So just saying, nobody's tried this with dog waste, but these things, they can, big bird talking, there's a possibility here. If someone would experiment with it, if they had a grant, if they had some extra funding, some extra time, they could literally try this with dog waste. This is Israel's take on this. They're very commercial. They're much more like America. They're in business. They want to make a profit. And that's what this is all aimed at. You can see at the top here where the food goes in. That's sort of really like a cow. And you can see that it can be hooked up to a toilet. So obviously you can use it for manure. So there are people who are off the grid who use this thing as a bathroom. Now, they use it for food waste mainly. Here's all the information on it. The prices are quite modest. It might be a lot to do shipping. $738, $1,000, $1,300. They have many, many videos. And they're really kind of targeting upscale households. And they have this cute little cover that goes on the top. And you can have people over to your patio, and you can cook them dinner on the patio. And you can show them your nice biodigester, which is gorgeous with a little cover on top and does not look like the cow, sort of. So apparently they're buying them. The problem with all these above ground ones is you need to keep them warm. and she's obviously in a warm climate, and it works well for them. Now, Living Web has tried this home biogas, the same system. They did a trial in North Carolina. I exchanged emails with Richard Frudenberger, who did the test. This was several years ago. They said it worked out well. They did it with all manure, and they built a little greenhouse over it to keep it warm in the wintertime, so it would keep on operating. And he said something interesting. He said, be aware that the code compliance with human waste in the system will not pass muster in local North American municipalities, because you're not going to get the pathogens out. So your pathogens or your effluent and your digestate will have to be taken for water treatment. But he said dog and cat waste should not fall under the same strictures, but it would be not safe to presume you can use it on your food garden. However, what I've found with EnviroAg is in Colorado, they don't know what to do with you in terms of pathogens. The EPA, there's as much dog waste being produced right now in the United States as human waste in 1959. But the EPA isn't talking about it. They said, well, let each state deal with it. And each state sort of doesn't know what to deal with it, and they all talk about it in different ways. And I would go to local environmental public health meetings in Colorado, ask them about dog waste, and they were so tired of hearing about it. They said, just treat it like it's a cow, for goodness sake. You didn't know what to do. Other states may do it differently. But the point is, dog and cat waste is under the radar. Now, with cows and sheep, or with horse manure, it's possible to totally feed waste into this system. And he said, I do not know if that would work with dog waste, but feel that it should. So that's the closest track we have to the possibility.
Rose, you've got just 3 minutes left.
Okay, but I got the bigger package, Ruth, but I'm going to try to wrap it up. Okay. So this is the Chinese one. Their whole thing is totally tech oriented. They say it's for households. The intriguing thing about this is it comes with a generator. So you could probably use the biogas, and we don't know. You'd have to talk to the manufacturer. The generator could probably warm the unit. This is an intriguing unit. It's all underground. It could be used in a dog park. This is just big bird talking. Nobody knows. It has a generator attached. You could put dog waste down here. It could go into the septic tanks. No drainage. It has a pump, apparently. It could be pumped out. The liquid could be used as fertilizer. You'd have to deal with your local state to figure out what the pathogen level is. But a model, this is perfectly wonderful, and it works right now, is in Toronto. And this is the same kind of model that's in many Canadian provinces. And they do accept some of them do accept dog waste. And this is the green bin plan. This is the ideal. They pick up all your compostables, including pet waste. And Toronto has a system where they have a hydro pulper, and it goes, they put it all in, and it goes whoosh, and it chips it all up, and it takes all the plastic and all the packaging and whips it up to the top so that it can be put into a landfill, and it keeps the organics in the bottom, and it digests it. And the digestate, the fellow who I talked to in Toronto several years ago, he said it's the consistency of gingerbread dough, and it doesn't smell any worse. And I thought that was pretty cool. Now, there are facilities like this all over, not like Toronto's, but look at the United States. There are all these anaerobic digestion systems. Look in the Midwest, all the cows, all the cattle, and they're using these things. Lordy, South Carolina, North Carolina has them. Australia has these systems just dotted all over. Looks like they're mostly in the South and over here in the East. And Canada has tons of them, especially around Ontario and Vancouver. And in Europe, the biggie is Germany. They know all about this. And in fact, The model biodigester in Toronto was manufactured in Germany, they told me. And of course, UK is fooling around with this too. And do we still have Mike here from Cetera? Mike, are you there? Mike's
here.
there, but his mic is off. Hi, Mike. We're going to talk a little bit about Cetera. You're in Ontario. You collect dog waste with this marvelous system, and we hope to have a webinar by you talking a lot more about it. But what I wanted to know is that you take some of your digestate or some of your dog waste to the BioN plant in Toronto. Do you pay a tipping fee to give them that?
We do. Yeah. It's
Okay.
yeah. And
Okay,
the
and they
BioN
accept
is north of Kitchener, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So so that's kind of our presentation for today. Hope you found it useful.